It was not until the 18th century, observes art historian Arnold Hauser, that anyone dared to emphasize the superiority of the layman to the specialist, and to express the idea that the feeling of people who are constantly dealing with the same thing necessarily become blunt, whereas those of the amateur and layman remain natural and fresh. Unquote. The feelings of the specialist become blunt for this very reason, that the specialist must subscribe to the rules laid down by the institutions which fund the research, whereas the amateur or layman, being self-supporting, need only please himself. Astrology, the people's science. Aries, what it is. Taurus, what it's worth. Gemini, how its worth is most effectively communicated. Cancer, its worth communicated to itself, to its near and dear. Leo, communicated to strangers. Virgo, its worth reevaluated in the light of contradictions. Libra, contradictions balanced if not effaced. Scorpio, contradictions incubated. Sagittarius, contradictions intellectually, spiritually resolved. Capricorn, its worth to the world. Aquarius, its worth to the future. Pisces, what it can't possibly but must be. Aries, what it is. I'm a communist because all our shit is pretty much alike. I'm an anarchist because no two assholes overlap. It is the nature of the state to break the solidarity of the human race, asserts Bakunin. The state cannot preserve itself as an integrated entity and in all its strength unless it sets itself up as the supreme be-all and end-all for its own subjects, although not for the subjects of other unconquered states. This inevitably results in the supremacy of state morality and state interests over universal human reason and morality, thus rupturing the universal solidarity of humanity. And again, Bakunin. But poverty and desperation are still not sufficient to generate the social revolution. They may be able to call forth intermittent local rebellions, but not great and widespread mass uprisings. To do this, it is indispensable that the people be inspired by a universal ideal, historically developed from the instinctual depths of popular sentiments, amplified and clarified by a series of significant events and severe and bitter experiences. It is necessary that the populace have a general idea of their rights and a deep, passionate, quasi-religious belief in the validity of these rights. When the idea and this popular faith are joined to the kind of misery that leads to desperation, then the social revolution is near and inevitable, and no force on earth will be able to resist it. Revolution requires extensive and widespread destruction, writes Bakunin. A fecund and renovating destruction, since in this way and only in this way are new worlds born. Unquote. Artists service the future. If they are prevented, the future arrives out of service. Since it terminates with death, self-interest carries on unconscious of the future. The future of self-interest is foreshortened to fit into a body. Can't smell the future without a mental nose, without faith blind as stone, without looking past one's pallbearers. Science must shut any case that it opens, including the case for the future. Otherwise, it can't commodify and sell it. Closure is what its corporate paymaster craves. Organized closures make a system, establish a line of conceptual product, establish what Adorno calls the culture industry. Raoul Vaneigem, taking up the theme of what Bakunin calls the necessity of a fecund and renovating destruction, describes the new innocence. Quote, "The red dawn of riots cannot banish the monstrous creatures of the night. It clothes them in light and fire, strewing them across town and countryside. The new innocence is baleful dreams becoming reality. Subjectivity cannot construct itself without destroying whatever stands in its way. The violence necessary for this it draws from the interworld. The new innocence is the clear-sighted construction of annihilation." The most peace-loving people are haunted by dreams of blood. How hard it is to be solicitous toward those whom one cannot kill on the spot, to use kindness to disarm those one cannot disarm by force. I have a great debt of hatred toward those who have very nearly succeeded in enslaving me. How can hate be destroyed without destroying its causes? The barbarity of riots, the arson, the people's savagery, all the excesses which terrify bourgeois historians are exactly the right vaccine against the chill atrocity of the forces of law, order, and hierarchical oppression. In the new innocence, the interworld suddenly erupts and sweeps oppressive structures away. The play of pure violence is transcended by the pure violence of revolutionary play. The shock of freedom works miracles. Nothing can withstand it. Not mental distortions, not remorse, not guilt, not the sense of importance, not the brutalization produced by the world of power. When a water pipe broke in Pavlov's laboratory, none of the dogs who survived the flood showed the slightest trace of their long conditioning. Can the high tide of social upheaval have less effect on people than a broken water pipe on dogs? Wilhelm Reich recommends explosions of anger for neurotics with emotional blocks and muscular armoring. This kind of neurosis is, I think, particularly widespread today. It is simply survival sickness, and the most consistent explosion of anger will probably bear a suspicious resemblance to general insurrection. 3,000 years of darkness will not withstand 10 days of revolutionary violence. The reconstruction of society will necessarily entail the simultaneous reconstruction of everyone's unconscious. Unquote. Raoul Vaneigem. When humans first became aware that they were alive, nature threw so many obstacles in the way of their survival that they feared they were surrounded by enemies. Consequently, they projected their most hysterical mental energy into the image of a god who functioned like a primitive air force by destroying the enemy's defenses from above. The truth of our situation, however, is more daunting than we feared. We are not surrounded by enemies, nor by friends either, for that matter. On the contrary, as a species, we are stuck here in infinite, not centrally located curved space, entirely alone with only the figments of our imagination, aside from our dear unself-conscious companions from other species, to distract us from ourselves. And so long as we remain too anxious to acknowledge our solitude, we'll underrate the power of solidarity to calm our fears. Because what is solidarity, after all, but all of us alone together in infinite space? And so we'll continue to remain split in two, into superior and inferior social classes, owners and dependents, if only to prove to ourselves that someone is in control and someone under control. Furthermore, we'll continue to pretend that because the social reality we make is real, it must be inevitable. And wouldn't I do the same thing if I found myself alone in infinite space? Wouldn't I split in two and try to kick my own ass in order to convince myself about who's in charge? In short, the economic injustice of capitalism represents a last-ditch effort to save face before we reluctantly admit that we got history off on the wrong panicky foot. A world in which we work together to work as little as we can. That's not too much to ask of man. History will go down in history as a false start. The bird of history will fly up its own asshole. Quote, the gauntlet thrown down by reification to each person's creativity is no longer to be found in some theoretical what is to be done. It lies rather in the practice of the revolutionary act. Anyone who fails to discover in revolution the crucial passion which opens the door to all others can attain but a travesty of real pleasure. Unquote, Raoul Vaneigem. Under capitalism, each generation, like a snake, strikes the heel of its predecessor. If you pray to Buddha, ask him to slide into City Hall on a sled of cobras. Quote, instead of being trained to be obedient subjects and disciplined wage earners dominated by the ideology of individual achievement, young people can be encouraged to think independently and to act in collective solidarity. Unquote. Ernest Mandel. After the largest corporation bought out all the others, it owned the rights to all business conducted anywhere in the world. In short, it became the sole owner and operator of the global economy. And since the only way to earn a living was to work for the corporation, everyone became its employees. Thus, its employees and its customers were the same people. Now the question is, in a situation where its workers and customers are the same, how does the firm make a profit? For suppose the annual profit of the global corporation is 10%. That is to say, the incoming revenue is 10% higher than the outgoing expenses. In other words, the consumers of its products, which includes everyone in the world, pay 10% more than the costs necessary to make the products and to market them. Now, since all the natural resources of the earth are owned outright by the corporation, as well as all the means of production, that is, factories, machinery, transportation, etc., then the total expense must consist solely of salary, of wages. Therefore, for the corporation to show a 10% annual profit, its employees must pay 10% more as consumers than they earn as workers, which is impossible. Consequently, breaking even is the best the corporation can do, whether business is brisk or slack. Therefore, the only way to give everyone an even break is to break even. It is this clear-sighted certitude, writes Lukács, that guides Rosa Luxemburg in the campaign she waged for the emancipation from the physical bondage under capitalism and its ideological emancipation from its spiritual bondage under opportunism. Unquote. This is why only when there is no opportunity to succeed, as in an economic depression, is it possible to even begin to emancipate ourselves from the spiritual bondage of opportunism. Capitalists call genuine democracy mob rule. We call it mob home rule. Quote, no quantitative amelioration of its misery, no illusion of hierarchic integration is a lasting cure for its dissatisfaction. because the proletariat cannot truly recognize itself in a particular wrong it suffered, nor in the righting of a particular wrong. It cannot recognize itself in the righting of a large number of wrongs either, but only in the absolute wrong of being relegated to the margin of life." Unquote, Guy Debord. In a game of chance, every time I lose, my faith in the power of my luck decreases. But every time I win, my faith in my luck is renewed. So that if, in order to have confidence in myself, I must believe in the power of my luck, then, if I lose, I must keep gambling in order to regain my good opinion of myself. But even if I win, I must continue to consult the oracle of chance in order to learn whether my opinion of myself needs revising. The thing that's wrong with gambling is that the gambler voluntarily surrenders control over his own opinion of himself to an authority outside himself, and hence habitually comes to depend on that authority. In the case of gambling, an impersonal authority. In nearly every other case, a human authority, to judge how he is doing. Piñata. Mother gives birth to baby stuffed with C notes. What is left to chance, like enjoyment, is a matter of indifference. What is left to chance, like employment, is a matter of indifference. What is willed, like choosing friends, is of interest. Revolution wills society, makes it a product of man, not of nature. Hence, leaving the design of society to whoever gets there first, that is, to its founders, is much too chancy, much too natural, too much a matter of indifference to those who follow. Because of its essential commitment to the relation of superior and inferior, hierarchy is a sworn enemy of equality. And since one freely volunteers only among equals, whether to command or to be commanded, hierarchy is a sworn enemy of freedom. Now, the sole function of hierarchy is to control chaos. Without chaos, hierarchy loses its raison d'etre. Therefore, hierarchy tends to produce chaos in one area, the unwieldiness of bureaucracy, for example, as the result of reducing it in another area. Now, while hierophants repress freedom on the grounds that freedom, by definition, verges on chaos, the truth of the matter is that since both freedom and chaos presuppose equality, the equality of chaos being that all are equally unrestrained, the equality of freedom that no one is more restrained than another, their ultimate motive for repressing freedom is because they hate equality. Anyhow, when it becomes obvious that hierarchy produces more chaos than it controls, it is overthrown by a new, more vital hierarchy, which pays lip service to equality, that is, gives the spirit of equality a blowjob instead of a life, and even lowers the arch of hierarchy so that the keystone is closer to the ground, that is, the opportunity to rise in the hierarchy, and therefore the opportunity to hate equality, is offered to the masses who, embodying the spirit of equality, are compromised to the extent that they avail themselves of this opportunity to hate themselves. But hatred of equality on the part of the hierophant, who at the same time preaches equality, raises an invisible arch of deceit that crushes all of us who bear its weight. Chaos, no one answerable to anyone, uncoordinated, none except momentary communication, which is just as suddenly broken off. Order, each answerable to one above, hierarchy, like an army organized by fear of punishment. Freedom, each answerable to each other, since all are equal. Freedom implies the mutual consent of each in forming transient hierarchies for the purpose of accomplishing specific tasks. Each participant, no matter his or her rank in the transient hierarchy, equally invested in the success of the outcome, since the reward is the same for each. The egalitarian army is organized not by fear of punishment, but, as in fucking, by anticipation of mutual pleasure. Confronted by the perpetual reemergence within itself of the relationships characteristic of the dominant world outside, admits Raoul Vaneigem, that group, Situationist International, found that its own means of dealing with this situation, exclusion and rupture, were inadequate, and a way was never found to harmonize intersubjective agreement and differences. Unquote. As a shoe roughly transmits the shape of the foot to the ground, so the organization impresses upon the social environment the common spirit of the members of the association. The organization preserves the association against the power of dissolution inherent in the environment. But if the organization works against the association, even if only to preserve it by subverting its principles, then, like a shoe which doesn't fit, the organization impresses the road upon the foot rather than vice versa. Its bond with the environment is stronger than its bond with the members of the association. As individuals express their lives, so they are. Karl Marx. Quote, "It will become clear eventually," writes Vaneigem, "that the portion of the proletariat with no concrete possibility of subverting the means of production is in need not of organizations, but rather of individuals acting for themselves. Such individuals may confederate from time to time into commando groups for the purpose of sabotage, attack on the apparatus of repression, occupation of radio stations, etc. They will intervene wherever and whenever the prospect of tactical and strategic effectiveness is offered. Their sole concern will be to pursue undivided gratification and, inseparably, to kindle the fire of working-class guerrilla warfare, that negative and positive fire, which, though it begins in the very heart of the proletariat, is nevertheless the only possible basis for that class's abolition as part of the abolition of class society in its entirety." The catchword of Russian propaganda was success, until the economy failed. The catchword of American propaganda was freedom, until everyone knew someone in jail. Quote, "The adherents of the true critique must struggle in practice among the irreconcilable enemies of the spectacle," summarized Guy Debord, "and admit that the truth is absent where they are absent. Conversely, the critique which goes beyond the spectacle must know how to wait." Unquote.